There's, I think, a joke that
The mic?
if you beat the data enough, they will confess. Right?
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
So with that, let's get into sort of the first part of this, and I think this is probably going to be the trickiest question. And by all means, I'm not trying to put you into trouble, but I am. Which is, what does privacy mean to you? And I'll do a little bit of qualification here because I think it's an important question. If you don't understand privacy, we can't understand its role in recommendations or in systems. I think there is a divide between physical privacy or privacy in the physical world and privacy in the digital world. So privacy in the digital world can in one way could be the things that you take or actions that you take in apps, websites, or different products that you use. And in the physical world, it's like physically where you are and what are you wearing, what you like to eat, maybe where do you live, those kinds of things. And I think a little bit of what's happening today is that this divide is sort of becoming less and less obvious. So you have GPSs, which are essentially digital devices, but they are tracking you in the physical world. You have Alexa, Echo type devices at home who are listening to everything that you're saying, even though, so the lines between physical and digital privacy are maybe getting blurred. In this context, and also like CCTV cameras, I saw a report that said Britons are caught on a camera average 300 times a day. So if you have good facial recognition software, probably they know where you are and where do you get coffee and where do you sneak off during your so-called lunch breaks. So in this context, I'd like to just get your thoughts. I'll probably start with Surbhi. Just what does privacy mean to you, and maybe whether you want to take the physical aspect of it or digital or however you want to approach it.
Thank you, Ashish. That's a very interesting question and something that I ponder about a lot. Because I think as human beings, we feel very secure as long as we have some physical enclosure around ourselves. So we make our home secure, Nest cameras, everything. But we don't really think of digital security as much. Every website you go to, has information. You're leaving your digital footprint. We don't worry about that. Yet when we go out and we are captured by CCTV cameras, we worry about that. So I think the human perception of privacy is very complex. Outside, we also want to know when there is a malicious activity happening. Yet, if we are captured on camera, we worry about that. So it's about where does the profit or the advantage of having things where you're being, there is vigilante effort going on versus when it encroaches upon your personal privacy. That's a very hard issue to grapple with. And for products like, Google Home or Nest cameras and things that, I'm part of those teams, it's very hard question to think day after day, like, what's going on. I'll give you an example. In my neighborhood, a lot of people have Nest cameras. So when I go for a walk, I know I'm on the cameras of many of my neighbors. Yet I feel in a way it's good. If something malicious or bad is happening, maybe it's good that somebody has that on camera and has some awareness. So you have to think of both aspects of that picture. And I will end it by saying that human nature is very complex, and in understanding how you are feeling safe and secure in your home, sitting on your computer and maybe ordering coffee, even that footprint gives a lot of information to somebody of what your habits are. Not just being outside on a CCTV, but also from your bedroom. You're giving a lot of insights about your personal life to various websites.
Yeah, and I think pulling the blinds does not help, literally, so to say. Debarag, do you want to just add some few comments here?
Yeah, so there are two aspects of privacy when it comes to how it is being used by digital products. One is the kind of the more cut and dried, black and white aspects of privacy. What's there in your EULA? Are you following it? Are you breaking it? Is it too deceptive, etc., etc.? And that, in a way, is I feel a little more cut and dried. I mean, it's like, as long as you do no evil, you're fine. And there is a good understanding of your customer, what you're doing, and what is it that they're revealing to themselves, and maybe that's still a little murky because people are not used to digital footprints the same way that they are used to, that, okay, when I'm going out for a walk, yes, it is a public street. The other aspect is a little more more nebulous, which is what is the aspect of privacy that that people feel the AI is doing to them. And that's because AI fundamentally kind of quote-unquote thinks in ways that are different from humans. So AI will pattern match and will say that you need these products. Now it's a pure pattern matching over massive amounts of data. It is not trying to figure out why is it that you need so and so. So if you if it suddenly starts, so let us say that a woman's pregnant and AI figures out from her previous things that yes, she is, and starts sending those things to her Amazon accounts or whatever. It did not actually think it through. It's simply matching what others in that cohort are. Now, if you think about it, that's not the way humans behave. Humans don't pattern match. Humans logically think. And there's another aspect of privacy, which is the harder part to understand and get around, that how do you ensure that people are not thinking you are being too creepy when you are actually not being, by anthropologizing that AI.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that thread of creepiness, I think we'll pick back up on. But I want to just quickly come back to you, Jocelyn, and you have a vantage point as a venture capitalist. You have deep experience in the industry yourself. You're a distinguished engineer yourself. When you look at a set of companies that you're maybe advising, interacting with, what advice, A, do you have about privacy, and how deep should privacy thinking be for an entrepreneur in starting, and plus your thoughts on privacy in general as well?
Well, I have sort of, I think privacy, I would advise consumer startups differently than B2B startups. Wearing my VC hat at Zetta, we invest in AI for startups solving business problems. So all our startups have B2B business models. They're working with enterprise and business data. And so for them, privacy is partly a function, it's a little less fraught, first of all. But privacy is largely a function of the data sharing agreements that enterprises are willing to make. What data are they willing to, and it's more a matter of compliance. Can those enterprises compliantly share their data, and can we observe the compliance requirements of the enterprise? And often enough, we're dealing with data that's not intrinsically about people. It's server logs, it's how fast is my data center running. When we are dealing with PII data, personally identifiable data, for example, perhaps we're dealing with customer data in a sales acceleration or a marketing acceleration context. Generally what we find is that actually the state of the art today, the status quo today is people aren't that worried about it. The customers say, hey, you can use my data, but it's got to be anonymized and de-identified, and you got to remove the PII. And usually most of the things we're trying to do with our models don't require the PII, so that's good for the startup too. I think on consumer it gets a little more fraught. And I guess, well, we'll talk about GDPR later, right? Okay.
I think I'm setting you up for the next home run.
Okay. Thank you. I'll try not to get ahead of myself. On the consumer side, I think it's a little bit different, because to tie it back to the theme of our talk with recommendations, I do think that there is implicitly often a contract where in exchange for the consumer giving us information about themselves, about their taste and preferences, we in return are able to deliver a highly personalized service. And the truth is, in my 4 years at Facebook, most consumers want to take that deal. I wanted to take that deal. Before I ever worked at Facebook, I created a Facebook account, and being a Gen Xer and not a millennial, at first I was kind of like a little privacy paranoid, and I'm like, well, I'll give you my name and email address and birth date because I have to, and my gender because I have to, but I'm not giving you anything else, Facebook. And immediately, and so here's poor Facebook trying to make $1, and what can they do but serve ads? And all they know is that I'm a female in her early 30s. What kind of ads do you suppose I get? It's like 99% diet. And it's appalling. I don't want these ads. They're not relevant to me. I have no interest in this. And in fact, it kind of humiliates me to be seeing diet ads all the time in my Facebook. And so I'm like, Forget you, Facebook. All right, I may be female, and I may be in my 30s, but I also studied computer science and went to Stanford and live in a really ritzy zip code, and I have these titles. And I went and gave Facebook a bunch of information about me so that I could get a better class of ad. And that may make me a kind of unique person.
Did that work?
Yeah, oh yeah. Oh, big time. Big time. They had much more profitable ads to show me once they could place my income somewhere else. So yes, I recommend this to all of you. If you've been holding out on Facebook, you too can see more personalized ads. And the truth is, ads that are more relevant to you are better for you and for the advertiser. This is a win-win. And in all kinds of Facebook features that had nothing to do with ads, like the places and check-in, for the sake of showing their friends their beautiful vacation photos and being able to make maps and timelines, all the time, we're willing to share data with a service that's going to give us a personalized product back. And consumers want to make that deal. But the key is, where do you go from there? Because consumers don't have the expectation that you're going to share their data with someone else. And with ads, the fear always is that, now I'm seeing ads for, I don't know, Stanford alumni vacation destinations or vacation tours, and wait a second, did you tell Stanford about me? Or I don't know, Stanford knows about me, but the idea that you've told some brand something about me, and in reality, actually, the advertising technology stands as sort of a middleman. They actually don't share your data back with the brand. And they don't tell the brand who you are in order to target an ad at you. But that implication that they might have shared without your permission is where I think the creep factor starts to show up. And I think that the super creepy thing that everybody comments on is retargeting ads, right? Where, wait a second, I'm on a completely different website, but I'm seeing my shopping cart from Wayfair. That's really creepy. And it's creepy because the implication, even though not the reality, is that they've shared your data. So when I sit with consumer companies and try to give advice, it's really more around the feelings about privacy than the substance of privacy. And I think, to Surbhi's point about what actually endangers you and what actually helps keep you safe, I don't think we're in a world right now where people's perceptions about privacy are totally aligned with the reality of it.
Fantastic. I think that's a great point. I remember seeing a cartoon one time which said that couples can't gift each other surprises anymore, because if they're searching on the web, the other person knows because they keep getting retargeted for whatever that your spouse was searching for. I think, Surbhi, you had a very funny story the other day.
Yeah. I had exactly the same, where we talk about usefulness to creepiness, and where do you draw that line? And while I completely agree with Jocelyn that giving your data gives you much better ads that are personalized, that are useful, meaningful, that I can take advantage of, it also creeps into what you're talking about, Ashish, where I think I was planning a surprise vacation for my kids to Disneyland over Christmas, and my daughter started seeing ads for Disneyland, and she's like, oh, what's going on? So it's things like that, and I was shocked. So our accounts are not related, but because there's a lot of sharing that happens in emails or photos or whatever, there is a underlying awareness of who is connected to whom. Like Jocelyn is saying, who is getting that data and how they're using it, it's beyond our knowledge and scope, and that's where we are not really aware and not even concerned that those things are happening. So that's where the creepiness factor kind of gets in, and you wonder, as somebody who's making recommendations, am I doing my customers, my users a service by making it super focused and recommended based on their likes and their lookalike modeling, versus taking a step back and making it slightly more generic and not too super focused.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. I want to quickly touch on GDPR, and don't want to belabor the point, but I think it's important to have a perspective of a regulatory lens. My sense is that often we need to go much beyond regulation, because the idea is to have trust from your consumers. So you can't just hide behind that. Jocelyn, I wanted to get your perspective on GDPR as well as Debarag, because you have an international business experience. You know you've worked with in India as well as in the United States. So I want to hear your perspective as well on how you're seeing some of the emerging markets with respect to some of these regulations.
Sure. In a way, emerging market. So I would actually say that, although Asian markets, emerging markets are foreign just as EU are for, they are in a way kind of, at least in my experience, the two opposite poles in respect to how how much they allow brands and how much they allow companies to experiment, to innovate, and make mistakes along the way. EU is probably a lot more cautious, conservative, and hence GDPR is probably the strongest government-mandated privacy standards out there. What I see in India, in China, in Asia, and other places is actually the opposite, where there is an increasing awareness of an opportunity, which is that while we in the West, in the US, have developed our economies in a certain way, they have the opportunity to leapfrog that and start anew. So for example, if you are in a country like, let us say, India, where the roads are pretty broken, and if you want to go to a mall, it'll take you like half of a day or something, then your primary way of shopping starts becoming more and more e-commerce. And that is a leapfrog, because there are people who are making brand purchases, branded apparel purchases, and so on and so forth for the first time over a mobile, and not by walking around malls and finding which brand suits them. So it is not so much about trying to replicate the experience that we have developed here in the West, but by asking the question, okay, if the information revolution is happening at the same time as the Industrial Revolution, or sometimes even preceding it a little bit, then how do you rethink the society? And I feel that these countries are kind of more attuned to letting companies do that experiments. Of course, they have their own regulations. Very famously, before that, when there was Facebook tried to come in with its Facebook Open or Facebook Lite, something like that, and that got shut down and all that. That's a different story.
Yeah.
So two different poles, I would say.
Yeah, that's fantastic perspective, Jocelyn. Your thoughts?
Actually, I can definitely agree with that. We look at a lot of AI applied to healthcare, and one trend I've started noticing in the last year is a lot of healthcare entrepreneurs getting off the ground actually with hospitals and clinicians in India or China, where they can more readily access patient data and build and train their models to accuracy before trying to come across to sort of get critical mass of data in a slightly more lenient data environment before trying to penetrate US or EU. I think GDPR itself is clearly a factor. We were definitely hearing for the last 2 or 3 years from enterprises who were alarmed, were unprepared, were spending a lot of money trying to get their house in order. Think about banks and insurance companies, this kind of company, and so we definitely see it as an opportunity for startups to build tools to help companies manage their data, to help enterprises be GDPR compliant. I think one thing that became relatively clear as GDPR went into place was that it was still, even though it's thousands of pages of documentation, it's still in some ways underspecified. Mm-hmm. You still don't actually know if you're in violation. Some parts of it are in contradiction with itself. Mm-hmm. And so I think we're looking at, I wouldn't call GDPR sort of settled law. I think we're still looking at a decade or more of investigations, assessments, fines, before there's kind of a sense of the case law, like the practically how is GDPR going to be applied? Is it really just a stick that's going to be used to try to, keep U.S. tech behemoths to toe the line, and pay their taxes in Europe, or is it truly going to go farther than that? And so that's just I think there's still a lot of unknowns.
In that light, Jocelyn, I think the core problem is how do you get trust or foster trust in the consumer about their privacy? And I think associated to trust in privacy is trust in the recommendation itself. I think we are hinting at the creepiness factor also with that. So I'd like to lead into that part of the discussion with you.
I don't know if there's a black and white answer to this. I think I said before, I think there's a line between the consumer shares some data with you explicitly, and you serve up a better recommendation because of it. Or even implicitly, like with every purchase I make on Amazon, I see recommendations related to that purchase. That strikes me as, that makes me trust a lot in the quality of the translation, and it doesn't engender distrust of my privacy because I expect Amazon to know what I've bought from Amazon. Mm-hmm. I think I think you've actually used trust in two different senses, and let's untie them, because they're two different things. Trust in the recommendation versus trust in the service. Because I think that I can make the recommendation higher and higher quality the more signals I put together about you, the more I compare you with lookalike, the more I notice that I've got this corpus of messages that you've exchanged with other people and that might not have been, specific. And I think that when I sort of implicitly go beyond what you've explicitly told me, but I start showing you things where I think, oh, that's a really on-point recommendation, but boy, I didn't ask. How did you know? Yes. I love it. People do ask me, is Facebook listening to me over the microphone in my phone? Because I was talking about this thing and then I saw an ad for it. It has to be snooping on me. And I'm like, no, that's idiotic. Facebook does not do that. I promise you, Facebook does not do that. All right, like you were talking, it's correlation. All right, you were talking about the thing and you probably had some Google searches about it or some other activities, or you resemble other people who buy that thing, and that's why you also got an ad about it. But I think the creep factor, the distrust of the service comes in when we think you've shared our data or we think we've accessed data that we didn't intend you to have permission to. I think it's a really hard problem for a startup to know what's the intent in the end consumer's mind. And, Facebook's attitude for a long time was, well, they did conflate trust in those two senses. They thought the more our engagement statistics go up, the more value we're creating for users, the more time they spend on the service. Eventually our NPS is weirdly low, but people will come around, right? It's just lagging engagement. And it turned out that was wrong, and that trust of Facebook and engagement with Facebook were two completely orthogonal settings. And in fact, a lot of the things that we did that drove engagement up actually set trust on fire. And Facebook's really late to the game to fix that. So I think new startups starting now should start with that realization that those are two independent variables, that you've got to track and measure both of them, that trust in your service is actually much harder to measure objectively. And I think right now there's not a sort of a rule book or a playbook. I think this is like a hard design challenge where designers and product managers have to be really thoughtful about how they design the product to not cross that creepy line. Or like us Gen Xers may all eventually die, and the Gen Zers won't care, maybe.
So let's hear from product managers. Okay. So I think the last question I'll probably ask to Surbhi and Debarag is, what are some techniques that you feel could work in fostering or engendering this trust in consumers?
So unlike Jocelyn, I'm going to make no such statements about who is doing what. I'm not taking any responsibility for what Google is doing. I'm just going to tell you from a product.
But when I talk to Google, when I say, okay, Google, and then give an utterance, I expect Google to listen to that. That falls under the heading of things I've explicitly shared.
We will listen to that.
You're allowed to do that.
Thank you, Jocelyn. I appreciate that. But as a product manager, I think what you're asking, Ashish, how do you build that trust? That trust comes over time. And I think I like to talk about the point you made, Jocelyn, that when you did not give enough data, it was giving you very generic ads, and that's great. But as the user feels more and more comfortable that they're sharing more with the service, I think you can dial up the recommendations to closer to what they like. But I think it'll have to be a very personalized thing. Mm-hmm. Different people, different segments of users will have different desires of what is okay for them and what is acceptable and what is creepy. And we will have to respect that and build that as part of the recommendation engine. Is also the ability of the user. What is their risk tolerance of taking really targeted recommendations versus keep it generic for me? So as I design my products, one thing I do, instead of going all out, I start with very little experimentation, see how people are responding, and then continue to build on that. And of course, always respect the person's, what I'm trying to say is their desire to get those recommendations versus staying away, keep out of my business and let me do it my way. So respect that, respect the user, their desire and their choices, and build products around that.
Fantastic. And Debarag, closing comments. So,
on that point about at what point do you become creepier, and why is it that somebody would think that this phone is listening to me when it's not, right? So I remember a kind of a YouTube video from one of Steve Jobs' talks a long time ago. This was like way back when he was explaining that how computers can almost simulate magic. How? By doing things much faster and with much bigger scale than otherwise. Now, in this case, think of it as if you think of a Sherlock Holmes like character who kind of observes whatever you observe, but has a superior intellect and can deduce more things from it, then you'll say, oh, it looks like you had that for lunch, right? And then you think, oh, did he actually, see me eating lunch? Well, the answer is it's just better deduction. Now, imagine AI as a Sherlock Holmes plus. Then, even deductions that were done with data that was very, very cleanly collected might actually start freaking you out. Simply because of the quality and the precision of that. So one way maybe to just make it dumber.
That's true.
But it's almost like we have to evolve as a society with consumers also understanding that there is AI, it's not human, and no, it's not always following you, and unless it is. So.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for this. I wish we had a little more time to take questions, but I wanted to keep the discussion going because it's hard to put these types of people on these panels. So really thank you for your time. Thank you to the audience. We will probably be around, so happy to take on conversations after.
Yeah, one of the best panels I've seen in AI.
Thank you.
Thank you.